Okay, good evening, everyone. Tonight's share, as usual, Yili Nishmat Avi Maridop, everyone Halevi, Imi Merati, Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And I understand there were a number of casualties in the Pigua today, so we should refer Shlema to all of those who have been in Piguim today, as well as since October 7th and before. So Hashem should send refer Shlema to them amongst all of Chole Am Yisrael. Tonight's shiur is about, of course, we start a new sefer this week. That it would be sefer Bamidbar, book number 4 of 5 of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. And the Chumash of Bamidbar is aptly noted as Chumash HaPikudim, the book of the countings, which in English, actually, this is probably the one, with the exception of Bereshit, that translates most suitably the book of Numbers, because we begin with the number of Am Yisrael, and we end almost toward the end. We're going to see again Am Yisrael is going to be counted, and we're going to have the numbers. So we're going to focus today on the count of Am Yisrael, and the number itself and the methodology primarily is what we're going to be focusing on for how the count took place, and comparing this number with some other numbers of the size of Am Yisrael in terms of people. So we begin right at the beginning of Parak Aleph, right at the beginning of the parsha. Hashem gives the command to Moshe, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe, B'midbar Sinai b'Ohel Moed. So firstly, the Torah tells us that we are now in Midbar Sinai, even though 2 weeks ago we read about the mitzvot that were given at Har Sinai. We're now back to Midbar Sinai and Ohel Moed, and it gives the Torah, interestingly, doesn't always do this. As a matter of fact, very infrequently does this, but here, the beginning of this book, it gives us a date for when the book is located. It's Echad HaChodesh HaSheni, meaning the first day of the second month, which is the month of Iyar. Shana HaSheni, year number 2, let's say Tamer Mitzrayim Lemor. So this happens in year from creation 2449, 1 year after Am Yisrael has left Mitzrayim. Actually, it's a year and 2 weeks since we've left Mitzrayim when this command is given to Moshe. And the command that is given is very simply, Se'u et Rosh Kol Adat B'nai Yisrael. Raise up the head of all of the congregation of the children of Israel, Mishpachotam, according to their families, Leveit Avotam, not just their families within the tribe, but Leveit Avotam, each family had a Beit Av. So it means, again, they are going to be tribal divisions and subdivisions. B'mispar Shemot, according to the number of names, Kol Zachar Ligulgalotam, every male, according to Ligulgalotam, means literally according to their head count. According to their heads, the number of heads we're going to count. The count is for every able-bodied male above the age of 20 years. Kol Yotzei Tzava Yisrael, all those who will enter into the army of Israel. Tifkedu Otam, you shall count them. Letziv Otam, according to their hosts. Atavi Aaron, you and Aaron. Really touch their heads? Great questions. No, it's Urash Bosh means lift up their heads. It doesn't mean physically lift them up. It means raise them up, elevate them. We're going to see how the Parshanim look at Se'u at Rosh. Yes, Maurice, go ahead. Every male, Maurice asking, every male, what about children and females? This count is males above the age of 20, and we're going to see actually that's not every male above the age of 20. It's only 20 through 60. It's a very specific slice of the population. Okay, even though it doesn't mention here it says 20 and above. I would think 70, 80, 90. No, it's 20 to 60 where the Parshanim are going to tell us. But it's males only, no children included. We're going to see perhaps why. We're going to see some interesting, hopefully we'll get to some of the commentaries and why specifically that is males only in that age group. Okay, now I'm skipping the whole count to go just to the last 2 verses. At the end of the count, we have 2 verses here at the end says the following: Ela hapekudim. These are the numbers asher pakad Moshe v'Aaron u'Nesiei Yisrael, that Moshe and Aaron and the leaders of the tribes of Israel, Shnei Ish, there were 12 men who were specifically selected, one from each tribe. Ish echad veit avotav hayu. There was one person who joined with Moshe and Aaron from each tribe. So they were the ones who were superintended, who made sure the count went right. And now the pasuk ends with Vayukol Pekudei B'nai Yisrael Veit Avotam. The entire count, the total for all of Am Yisrael, age 20 to 60. Again, it doesn't say from 20 to 60, it says from 20 and upwards. Kol Yotzei Tzava Yisrael, all those who are entering the Tzava of Yisrael, the army. Vayukol Pekudim, the final number in verse 46, we're told is Sheish Meot Elef, 600,000, Ushlosh Elefim, 603,000, 550. And then the Torah adds one little pasuk, the Levium, the tribe of Levi, is not included in this number of 603,550. Clearly, Torah tells us that. Okay? Now, for reference, I'm going to cite two other psukim here. Before we start to the parshanim, wait a minute. Here we go. There are two other places where the number of Am Yisrael is given in the Torah. One is in Shmot Perek Yud Bet, when they leave Egypt. That we are told by B'nai Yisrael Ramsei Sukkota, when they first leave Egypt, the first gathering point where they all gathered after they left Egypt was at Ramses, was at Sukkot. They traveled to Sukkot, and it says Kishesh Meot Elef Ragli Hagivarim Levad Mitah. Approximately 600,000 foot people on foot, the males excluding children. Okay, males only excluding children, approximately 600,000. Now, just for reference, Shmot chapter 12, where that verse is taken from, is the day after they leave Egypt, Pesach. Okay, our verse here, we are told, is a year later, a year and 2 weeks later, at the beginning of the second month, beginning of Iyar, 2449. The Jews are leaving Egypt. This is Pesach, 2448. Now in Shmot Perek Lamed Chet, which is parshat Pekudei, which happens between these two. There's an interval between these two. They leave Egypt, they get to Har Sinai, they have the Chet of the Egel. Moshe comes down with the second Luchot, and Hashem tells them they're supposed to build the Mishkan. Okay, and we are told that when they collect the money for the Mishkan, it says Bekala Gulgolet, all of the silver came from the following. It came from a Beka, a contribution for every Gulgolet for each person, Machatzit HaShekel b'Shekel HaKodesh, half a shekel in the sanctuary shekel, the Cholhol Veral HaPudim, for everyone who passed over to be counted, Miben Esrim Shana V'Malaf, again from the age of 20 and upwards. How many were there? 603,550. 603,550. By the way, it's very interesting because we have three different numbers, three different counts. I'm sorry. The first one says approximately 600,000. Second one, which is 6 months later, approximately, says 603,550. And the next one, which is another 6 months later, approximately, says the same number, 603,550. So you have to pay attention here that we've got three different numbers, and the parshanim are going to try to explain or look at and understand the discrepancy, if there is one, or how do we get to the same number twice, basically, is going to be one of the questions we're going to look at. The second question is, who is included in each count? How are the counts done? Those are the questions that we're going to be trying to deal with tonight. Go ahead, question. We're going to get to that. Maurice's question, so for those of you out there and here, how did they count? Did they count by giving the half shekel? Great question. We're going to hopefully address some of those questions as we get into it, okay? So again, as usual, we start with Rashi. Now, this is not Rashi in our parsha. If you look in all the Rashis in our parsha, you won't find this Rashi because it's in parsha where we have where we're told that everybody has to give a half a shekel. And that was before, when they were being told to build the Mishkan, everybody is supposed to give a half a shekel. And Moshe is told what you're supposed to do with this. In Atato, you're supposed to take this half shekel that you get from everybody to give it al avodat ohel moed. It's to be used for the work that's going to be done to build in terms of the sanctuary. Okay, so Rashi over there, and this is again parshat Kitisa. Neither, by the way, the quote that I brought from Shmona above was parshat Pikudei. This is a totally different Rashi, totally different place. Lamadata, Rashi says this pasuk is to teach us this parsha, which by the way is the parsha that we read on Shabbat Shkalim when we are reminded that we're supposed to give the shekel, half shekel every year for the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash and for the communal korbanot. Lamadata, this verse teaches us shenitztava limnota, that Moshe is commanded to count the people. B'tchilat nitvad hamishkan, at the beginning of collecting the donations for the Mishkan, everybody had to be counted. Achar ma'aseh ha'egel, after the sin of the calf. Nay, why? Why does there have to be a count after the egel? They should nichnas b'hem magefa, because there was a plague. After the sin of the egel, they're punished. There's a plague. Kemoshe nemar, as it says, vayigol Hashem et ha'am. After the chet ha'egel, Shem sent a plague among the people, presumably to punish the sinners. Okay, as we generally have when Hashem sends a plague, it's in response to a specific sin or a general sin that Hashem sends a plague. Mashal, now Rashi goes a step further. Mashal etzona chaviva al be'aleha. We compare this to, and he gives the example of sheep that is beloved to its owner. Why does the owner love his sheep? Because it represents his wealth. In reality, Rashi says, what do we do? We count our money. We count things that are important to us. We don't count how many hairs we have, okay, unless they're falling out, or how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. We don't count those things in general. We count things that we want, that are important to know how much there is. But he gives the example of a shepherd, okay, where the owner of the flock is very attached to his sheep. Shenofa bodever, and they had a plague among the sheep. Umisha Pasach, when the plague was over, Amar lo leroa, he says to his shepherd, his head shepherd, please do me a favor. I'm making a request. Count the sheep. I want to know how many survived this terrible plague. So again, when there's a plague, we count people to know how many are survived. But why? Not in general, not because we care, but lo diashi chaviva Allah. To show how beloved something is, we count it. Counting shows that that's important to us, that everyone is important. The Efshar Lomar. Now, Rashi is now going to address the next question. The first question he addressed is, why is there a count? Why are we counting them there before the construction of the Mishkan? Because it's right after Chet HaEgel. We need to know how many there are. Hashem wants to know how many Jews have survived the sin and the punishment, therefore. And Rashi now wants to address the second question. How did we get to 603,550 in two different countings 6 months apart? That's what Rashi is going to address now. The EF Shalomar, and it's impossible to say Shaminyan Hazeh, that this count that we have here, that Hashem tells him to count them before the construction of the Mishkan, is the same count that we have in our parsha in Bamidbar. Well, the number is the same, so we would think it's the same count. Rashi is impossible. They're two separate countings. Yes, they come up with the same number, two separate countings. Why? How do I know that? Rashi says, because the Torah specifically says that the date of our count in our parsha, Bamidbar, is after the Mishkan's already been built on the first day of the second month of year number 2, leaving from Egypt, 2449 from creation. A Mishkan, who come? The Echad Lachodesh Harishon. The Mishkan we know, was constructed and left up on the first day of the first month, the month before this count is to be taken. We were told in Parshat Pikudei that the Mishkan is to be put up on Rosh Chodesh Nisan 2449. That's a month before the count in our Parsha. Now, how? Okay, so what? So what? So who says that minyan? But why do I know that count had to be earlier than the Mishkan? The shekels that were collected in this first census after the Chet HaEgel were used for the foundation, the Adanim, the basis of the poles were put into. The silver was melted down and it was used for the Adanim. We learned all about that in Parshat Vayakel and Pekudei. That's what the Adanim were for. It's where the silver came from. Shenemar, as the pasuk tells us, the verse that we just quoted, that the money they collected from the half shekel from everyone, from the 3,550 people, was used for the Adanim. Therefore, we see that there were two different census. One of them was a count that was at the beginning of the contributions for the Mishkan, right after Yom Kippur, year 2449, when Moshe comes down with the second Luchot. The Achat B'Shana Shniya Iyar Misha Ukama Mishkan. And the second is when we get to our parsha, the second month of Iyar, after the Mishkan's already been erected. So therefore, they have to be two different census. Now Rashi says, okay, that's all great. How do we come up with the same answer? How do we get to the same exact count if they're two separate census and they're 6 months apart, right? V'im Tomar. So now you're going to ask me a question. Rashi says, how do we get to the same number? Shahare, because of Pekudei done Nemarkain, so we have the same exact number in two different places, and Rashi just said they are two different census. So how is that possible? They were in 2 different years, 6 months apart. And it seems to me, Rashi, it seems impossible that there weren't people at the time of the first count after Yom Kippur, but on all the 19-year-olds who grew up in that 6 month and passed their 20th birthday, who now should be counted. How did the number not change? How did we come up with the same exact number? There had to be people over the age who were 19 and a half on Yom Kippur who became 20 during this interim. Well, yes, yeah, but again, Rashi seems to be implying that the number of people who died would have been, again, your typical, in most growing societies, growing populations, your population pyramid gets narrower at the top. That's the normal way. Obviously, when you have all sorts of wonderful things going on in your population, you get skewed population pyramids and your future is at risk. That's a whole different story. But here we're talking a population that's growing. It's been growing. Look, we started out with 70 people 200 years ago. 70 people when they went to Egypt 210 years ago. And now there's 600,000. That's a pretty good growth rate. You got to assume they've got a standardized, a normal growing pyramid, that the base is significantly wider than the top. Therefore, Rashi says it's impossible that the number who become 20 should be exactly per person the same as the people who died off. Tshuva l'davar, but Rashi still has an answer. Now remember, Rashi's premise is that they have to be two different senses. So therefore, he's got to come up with a way that the number is the same. How is he going to do that? Very simply, at least theoretically, very simple. He says, Tshuva l'davar. Here's the very simple answer, and then I'll try to explain it. As far as the fiscal year for people is concerned, it's the same fiscal year. Okay? So what Rashi seems to be implying is the following, that there is a point in the year where there's a fiscal cutoff for being counted for whether you're 20 or above for giving your half shekel. If you were 20 when a certain point in the year happened, then you are counted in, and if not, you got to wait till the next year. Okay, we know we have that principle in a number of halachot. For example, when we count the fruit of a tree for Orlah, there's a fiscal year for Orlah. When we give Maser Behema, when we give our tithes for Behema, we have a fiscal year cutoff. It's not that, the animal has to be 365 days or younger. It's a fiscal cutoff. Okay, so Rashi is saying that when we come to doing a census, there's a fiscal year. And the fiscal year starts on Rosh Hashanah. That's Rashi's premise. So therefore, as far as Rashi is concerned, the reason the number is the same is because everybody who was over 20 on Rosh Hashanah is counted in both of these census. And anybody who wasn't, even though they may have become 20 before the second census was taken, was not counted. Okay, that's Rashi's premise. As far as leaving Egypt, it was 2 different years because years we left Egypt, we count from Nisan. Yetziat Mitzrayim monim minisan kmo shenimsach Rosh Hashanah. The Nivda Mishkan Rishon Lukam Mishniyah Shenitchad Shashana Be'achad B'Nisan. So even though it seems that though 1 year was that both of these census happened in 2449. That's Rashi's premise. In other words, Yom Kippur 2449, even though they left Pesach, they left Mitzrayim Pesach 2448. By the time Yom Kippur rolls around, it's already 2449. It's a new fiscal year, and anybody who has turned 20 by that Rosh Hashanah counts already in that fiscal year. And therefore, both that count and the one after the Mishkan is finished 6 months later are within that same fiscal year, and that's why the counts are the same. Now, wait a minute. Nimtzu shtem minyanim shenachal minyan rishon b'tishrei shenitzratza be. Wait. Okay. Now, Rashi's whole point, by the way, in this being his conclusion that it's all in one fiscal year, is to show us the miraculous nature of this generation. Now, again, question, wait a minute. You mean nobody between 20 and 60 died between Yom Kippur and the next year? That's exactly what Rashi is saying. That Hashem's blessing, because they were involved in the work of the Mishkan and the establishment of the Mishkan, Hashem said the blessing that none of the males between the ages of 20 and 60 died between the first census and the second census. And that's exactly why the Torah emphasizes and gives us the number at both points to show us the miraculous nature of that. So Rashi, as I said, because of the Psukim, he says there are two different senses, and therefore he reaches a conclusion to show a point. Yes, you had a question.
No, so when they were counted.
Yes.
And then
No. People over 60 are not counted. But I'm sorry. But again, in any population, in a normal population, you have people between the ages of 20 and 60. Not everybody reaches 60 before they die. Unfortunately, we have people who die much younger than 60, especially when you're traveling through a desert or whatever. Okay.
They were counted at the beginning.
Right, and that's exactly Rashi's point. But the point Rashi's saying is that of the people who are counted, none of them died. Okay, that's Rashi's point.
But you're not going to count them again. You said you only count them.
No. There were two separate counts, and the count comes up to the exact same number. That's because it's all the same people. That's what Rashi's saying. It's the same exact people who are counted in both senses. And the reason it gives the number both times is to show us, to make that point, that miraculously none of these people died in that 6-month period, or that they were busy collecting the money and working on the project of building the Mishkan. Because of that, none of them died. Okay. Yes. After Rosh Hashanah, if they became 20 after Rosh Hashanah, they're not counted. Correct.
Why?
It does. People who were 60 and may have turned 61 before were still counted. That's the point. No, the reason the number is exactly the same is because all the people who had passed their 20th birthday but had not yet passed their 60th birthday are counted. And I'm sorry, has nothing to do.
Person died, you don't
No, but no. Here's the point Rashi is trying to make: is let's say somebody was 50 years old. Okay, he's in the count. Okay, but what if he died? If he died, we wouldn't count him. You can't count a dead person in a count of how many people are alive. Okay, that's the point. That's exactly the point Rashi is trying to make: is that none of these people, once they were counted the first time, none of them died before the second count. That's Rashi's point, to make that point, and he's quoting it from the Midrash. Okay, B'chor says the following, goes in a very different direction than Rashi. Okay, he says the following. First, he gives again the rationale for the count. Chodesh Achad Achar HaKamat HaMishkan. As we know, the second month, beginning of the second month, we're 1 month beyond the construction of the Mishkan, the completion of the Mishkan and the establishment of the Mishkan. And we've now established the Mishkan, and the Kohanim have all been given their duties. They know what they're doing. The Avri Yemei Miluim and Isra Karbanot, all the laws of Karbanot have been given. These are Alim and Yoni Tumot, and all the laws of Tuma and Tara, when you're allowed to be in the Beit HaMikdash, when you're not. Okay, Siva Lamanot and Achayalot Sheachanu Saviv Lamelech. The reason for this count is to know the number of Chayalim, of the size of the it's the staff, the serving, the army that's going to camp around the king. Okay, because again, the Mishkan represents the king. Okay, it's Hashem's Kiviyachol, his dwelling place on earth. And there's a second purpose. These have to be ready to fight. These people who are recounting have to be of fighting age. And now they're going to be divided into 4 different groups for the 4 different directions. Because they're all going to camp around the 4 directions of the Mishkan. This is proper respect for a king, a monarch, who has all of his officers and his servants surrounding him, encircling him. The Huba Emtzan, he is in the middle. In other words, he's protected from all directions, and he is being served from all directions. The Derech HaMelech, we know another normal practice. When you're about to go out to war, what do you have to do? Limanot hatzavah. Got to know how many people you got. You got to know how many uniforms you need, how many weapons you need, how much food you're going to need. You got to know you're going on a military campaign. You don't know how many soldiers you got. You're going to be in trouble. You're going to be either have way too many supplies, you're not going to have enough people to carry them, or you're going to have not enough supplies. Every king would do such a thing. When in times of old, before you went to war, you had to know how many soldiers you had. Monim chayalot, we would count the army, as we see in other places. When Shaul goes out to fight against Nachash B'nai Ammon, when he first is becoming king, he raises an army, and what does he do? He counts them. Bezek. Bezek one says it this way, but it was whatever, he counts them. Similarly, when Shaul is going to fight Amalek, he counts them also. Each of these cases, he counts them. When we have the word Vayifkod in Tanakh involved with counting, it's generally for military purpose. It's a campaign of seeing how big the army is. And similarly, when they come back from the campaign, Moni Motam, we have to count them again. Later, how many casualties were there? How do you know how many casualties there were? By counting how many are left. As we see in the war after Midyan, Moshe says, how did we know what happened in the war against Midyan? We counted how many soldiers came back. By the way, in there it says specifically, Lo nifkad bimenu ish. There were no casualties, no fatalities in the war. V'chein siva HaKadosh Baruch Hu, therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Moshe limanot et chelo, to count his army, u'lesadrom al digleihem, and to put them according to their different banners. Kibiasrim b'chodesh has a why. Why now on the second month? Kibiasrim b'chodesh then asuli karev l'lochem maknanim. Only 3 weeks after this happens, on the 20th of the month of Iyar, B'nai Yisrael leave Har Sinai for good and travel. Where are they going? They're going to Eretz Yisrael, to inherit Eretz Yisrael. What's going to happen when they go into Eretz Yisrael? They're going to have to fight. We got to know how many soldiers there are going to be to fight. Wait a minute. They didn't get there for another 40 years. What happened? Because of the Chet HaMeraglim, little 40-year detour here, but that's it. Now Bechor Shur adds very, very directly in opposition to Rashi. Zeh Pam Rishona Shenimnu. It's the first and only time that this generation is counted. By the way, there'll be another count 40 years later, because that whole generation has died out and we've got a whole other generation. But this is the only time that this generation is going to be counted. Why? Kibetziat Mitzrayim Lonimnu. And when they left Egypt, it didn't count them. It says about 600,000, the Torah says. Doesn't give an exact number when they leave Egypt. Kimashu Omer Kishesh Meod Elef Ragli, approximately 600. Zayaba Omer Hadad. That was an approximation. Yeah, it looks like about 600. It was like the crowd gathered, except since Hashem was the one who made it, it was probably a lot more precise than But the point he's trying to make is it's probably to the nearest 100,000 or maybe 10,000 or whatever. It's not a precise and exact number, and that's why about 600,000 below Sheshmiot. Not that Hashem could not have written the exact number, because Hashem clearly knew the exact number. Hashem doesn't need a census to know the exact number. However, the Torah there only gives the rounded number to give us an idea how much the B'nai Yisrael had multiplied during the 200 years they're in Egypt. That's the whole purpose of the number there, to give you an approximation of the size of the throng that is leaving Egypt. Although it really isn't, because it's only telling you how many males above the age of 20 there are. It doesn't tell you how many females there were and how many kids there were. So it really doesn't give us, but again, it gives us some idea of the magnitude of people leaving. It's a large group of people leaving Egypt. That's the point. The lo parat shum sham shum prat. There's no details given at all there. Keep me rami imnimnu shaloh yaprat. And how can I prove that they were counted? Otherwise, we would have had some more details. No. So okay. So he's answered how they weren't counted for left Egypt. But wait a minute. We just said that we had a number, an exact number in Pekudei, right before the Mishnah. So how can you say that now when they're being counted in Bamidbar, it's the first count? Wait a minute. What about the one they just counted 6 months ago? What about that one? Now he's going to explain it. Now in Elap Kudei, in parshat Kudei, it said everybody has to give half a shekel. They collected the half shekels. That's how they made the Adanim, right? That's what it seemed to imply. That's what Torah said. Okay? Zehu Zeh Minyan Shibakan. The Torah there is telling us, by the way, the amount of silver, okay, it tells us that the amount of silver that they needed to make the Mishkan just so happened to exactly equal the number of half a shekel for everyone there. Okay, but it wasn't that they collected the half a shekel. Don't think that the Adanim were made from the half shekels. No, that's not quite what it was. Don't think that was a count and that's how they accounted it. It was for the people who they knew were going to be counted here. Okay? To show how we love the Am Yisrael, that it should come out this way. She'ein lomar. It's impossible to say, B'chor Shor says, Shenimnu shnei pamim v'lo pachtu v'lo otiru. You tell me that they counted him twice and the number came out exactly the same. I don't buy that, he says. Can't be. Elanira shehem itnadvu kesef l'mishkan. Everyone gave to the Mishkan. Kol echad k'fi nidvat lipo. Lahutzvach ela b'zeh minyan. It just happened that Hashem made it that the amount of silver they collected was the same amount they would have collected, he says, if they had collected half a shekel for everybody. Not that they did, but it just happened to come out. That's how much silver they collected, and that's how much, but not that everybody gave a half a shekel. And when they were counted now in the second of the year in Iyar, it turned out today exactly what to tell us that, it just happened to come out. That the amount of silver they collected was exactly equal to a half a shekel per person. Okay? And then the count that they do in Arvot Moav, at Sefer, the end of the Sefer is different. Again, before they go into Eretz Yisrael, this generation died. And we count the next generation. But Hoshar says very simply, there's only one count for this generation. It happens now in parshat Bamidbar. The fact that we had the same number in Kudei is just, the Torah was just mentioning, by the way, coincidentally, the amount of silver they collected for the Mishkan happened to be the exact same amount as if everybody had given a half shekel of the people who are going to be counted in Iyar, not the people who are there now, according to Hoshar. Okay? Okay, Hadar Zekanim goes in a similar direction as B'chor Shor. Okay, Perish HaKuntris Alamatu Shnaim Hayuachat B'Tchilat Nidvatov Achat Yom Kippur B'Shna Rishonah. He goes through all the Rashi. First, Rashi says that there are two separate counts, and how can it be that they're both the same? And Rashi says, it gives the answer. Rashi gives it was all the same fiscal year. Okay. The Kashal Perushenu. Now here's the questions he has on Rashi. First, he quotes Rashi at length, who says that it's two separate counts, but since they're in the same fiscal year, same number, Kashal Perusho. Here's the problem I have. L'divrei Rabbi Yeshua, there's a machloket in Gemara Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Yeshua says Nisan Nivra Ha'olam, that the world was created in Nisan, and the fiscal year therefore is not Tishrei, but it's Nisan. So now they're in two different fiscal years, and we're back to the same question. The Ode, another question. Okay. Now he proves. Here he goes to prove that we know in general there are certain halachot that we count by a fiscal year, but we know there are other halachot that dafka we don't use a fiscal year. Okay, and one of them is the law of arachim. Arachim means when I pledge to give somebody value, their erech, their value to the Beit HaMikdash. And the value is determined by your age. It has nothing to do with your health. It has nothing to do with your how strong you are, how whatever you are. Has to do very simply with your age. If you're between 20 and 60, it's a certain amount. And if you're and your gender, male is one amount, female is another amount. And it's the same thing if you're. But over there, okay, we know. Since it says the word v'mala, v'mala, more than 1 month old, so clearly you can't measure months in a fiscal year. If it's 5 months to 5 years, then it's a certain amount. If it's 5 years to 20 years, then it's another amount. If it's 20 to 60, it's a third amount. If it's over 60, it's a fourth amount. So each of those are l'leidato shalana maninu, based on your birthday. Very simply, you're born on the 20th of Shvat. That's when you become a year older, on the 20th of Shvat, not on Rosh Hashanah. You don't suddenly, I was born on the 29th of Elul, and the next day later, I'm 2 years old already. I've already had my first birthday. No, it doesn't work that way, he says. The Ode Kasha, and why? The Ode Kasha, don't break it. We don't, when it comes to counting people's lives, we don't say 1 day is a year. You got to live a full year before you're called a year old, or 5 years old, or 20 years old, or whatever it is. Ela manidan mi eight li eight. It's by day by day. We count people's ages by their birthday. Kolomar, as if saying no b'chesher shegim b'chesher ninos shnazo im kain hadra kushel duchte. So now we're back to the original question. Okay, so in either of these cases can't be. Shari ef shalomar. Now it's impossible to say. Back to the original question. So he now gives his answer. Okay? Well, if there were 19-and-a-half-year-olds who grew up to be 20, there were 59-and-a-half-year-olds who were now 60 and got thrown out of the count. Not thrown out, but got excluded from the count, right? But again, still, there are other questions. Nonetheless, even though he says, well, again, you got people going out, people coming in, but it seems no matter how you slice it, it had to be the same count. If it comes up with exactly the same number, has to be the same count. It's impossible. The number of 19-and-a-half-year-olds precisely equal the number of 59-and-a-half-year-olds. Okay, so therefore he goes that it has to be that the count, it's one count, it happened on the 2nd of Iyar, and the Torah is telling us that when everybody gives, when are they going to give this redemption money? In Iyar. And in Iyar, the money is going to come out to exactly the amount they'll need for that they would have needed had they collected earlier for the Adanim. Okay, the Orach Chaim. Again, same thing. At first asks why we need this count. And Rashi explains that the reason, one of the reasons for the count was Hashem is now going to rest his presence on Am Yisrael, and therefore he's got to count them again to know how many there are. But the parshat, that doesn't seem to make sense, because if Hashem is going to build the Mishkan on 1st of Nisan, Why is he waiting another month to count them? If the whole purpose is when the Mishkan is functioning, we should know how many there are. You should know that before we start. Why a month later? If that's the case, Hayalu notes them Kodem, Kodesh Nisan, Loachaka, before Nisan, not after Nisan. Why are we waiting a whole month? If so, it should have been on the second day of Nisan. He should have immediately counted them. Now we ask the same second question. How do we get to six? We get to 603,550 in Cheshvan when they were counted right after the beginning of the Mishkan, right? However, we know when they left Egypt, right? When they left Egypt, it says there were 600,000. So in the period of time between leaving Egypt and after Yom Kippur, population grew by 3,500 people, according to Arachaim. And not only that, that increase, it must have been the bigger increase. Why? Because we know that many people died because of the result of the Chet Egel. There were lots of people who were punished because of Chet Egel. So the number of 19-year-olds coming into the cohort over the number of 60 years leaving the cohort is a significant increase. We have 3,500 plus all those that made up for the people who died in the Chet Egel. How can it be that in the 6 months between their leaving Pesach and Yom Kippur, despite the fact that they're all being punished for the Chet Egel, they grew 3,500, and now you're telling me that in the next 6 months between Cheshvan and Iyar, they didn't grow at all? Seems completely counterintuitive, right? It seems, hey, if the population is going up between Nisan and Tishrei, it's probably going to go up again between Tishrei and Iyar. If it means you've got a growing population. And also he quotes this midrash that Rashi bases his whole thing on. He says, we know that Hashem blessed them that while they were involved in the Mishkan, nobody died. So if nobody died and the 60 cohort is smaller than the 19 cohort, why hasn't the population grown in this 6-month period? So the answer he gives, okay, we're going to skip this. Okay. Here's the answer. Shekol Shevet Levi Shoklim Shkalim. We know there's a machloket in the Gemara whether when we collect half shekels every year, does the tribe of Levi and the Kohanim, the Levim and Kohanim have to contribute half a shekel for the Mishkan, or is it only the non-Levim and Kohanim? And we end up with the conclusion that yes, Levi has to pay a half shekel just like anybody else does. Ain kusha. So now that's going to, because we know that, we're going to resolve the issue of how the number comes out exactly the same. Why? In Parshat Pekudei, when we built the Mishkan, who was included? We have 603,550, including the tribe of Levi. In Parshat Bamidbar, we have 603,550, excluding Leviim. So what does that mean? Whatever the number of Leviim is, we don't know what that number is, but whatever that number was, that's where the population growth. The population growth happened to exactly match the tribe of Levi's number, and that's how we resolve the two. And that's why later on, that's why the last pasuk in this part, and it deals with the counting, tells us about Leviim lo hatbaktu b'toch B'nai Yisrael. Leviim weren't counted. Why does the Torah have to specifically mention Leviim weren't counted? Why do I need that pasuk? Right? How do I know that? Because I go to the 12 tribes. We listed all of the tribes. We didn't list Levi. And I know the 603,000. If I can do math, I can add numbers together, and you do it, you add them up, you get to the 603,550. Oh, That 635, 6,000, 600,000, 603,550 does not include the tribe of Levi. I would see that. Why did the Torah have to tell me they didn't count him? Why? But here, it's before they count the Levium. What does it come to tell me? That's to point out, to tell us. Don't worry that the fact that the number came out exactly the same. The answer is very simple, because the Torah tells us, points us to the answer by telling us, oh, by the way, this 603,000 does not include the Levium. The other one, which means to imply, clearly the other one did include the Levium. And that's where the discrepancy comes. Okay. Okay. Now, very interesting. Okay, let's go back. The point is, this also answers another question. Why does he wait another month to count them? This is exactly why Hashem picks this day to count them. Why? Because Hashem realized, oh, if I do it a month earlier, we're going to have a smaller number. If I do it on, this is the only day you'll ever be able to do this count, come up with the exact same number. And Hashem knew that, and that's just, okay, that's the day we picked for the count. So he could point out that the number is exactly the same, and two things. Nobody died, but the people who came 19 or were 20 over the number that came from 59 to 60 was exactly the number of Levium. And that's why we specifically count on that, specifically on that day, he tells them to count them. Now, one final thought I want to quote from the Ramban. Okay, because I think it's very important here. From Ramban, I'm going to skip Ramban on Pitisa because we're later than I thought. But here, Ramban reaches the same conclusion, by the way, saying that had to be two different counts, basically, and therefore one includes Levi and one doesn't. Ramban seems to reach the same conclusion, that it was all made up. But again, I wanted to final thought here, the Ramban. Okay, here we go. Okay, this is what the Midrash says. Mona Otam Kol Shah. Hashem counts B'nai Yisrael always because he shows us how much he loves Am Yisrael. The Ode, but here's the final reason why this specific count is happened and shows how much Am Yisrael, Hashem loves Am Yisrael. Ki haba lifnei av hanaviim. Anybody who would appear, now again, remember our parsha seems to imply that it was not through half shekels, it was everybody had to show up in front of Moshe and they were counted. Okay, ki haba lifnei av hanaviim. Somebody has to appear before Moshe, Av Neviim, the father of Neviim, the Achiv HaKadosh Hashem, and his brother Aaron, the Kohen Gadol. Moshe and Aaron and the Nesiim are all sitting there collecting the money and interviewing everybody as they're going by. Okay, who are you? What tribe? Who's your family? What's your father's name? Grandfather, great-grandfather. Told the tribal ancestor. Okay? V'hu noda aleim bishmo. And now Moshe finds out, oh, you're Chaim and Yankov and whoever you are, and you come from this tribe. Wonderful. Okay? Moshe, now, what is he going to do? He's going to give him a bracha, right? You sure put a bracha? Now Moshe is going to, by giving him a count, oh, you're so-and-so from so-and-such a tribe. They're going to look at them favorably. They're going to say, oh, Hashem should bless you. And what are they going to do? They say, Hashem should have mercy on you. Hashem should bless you and multiply you, like Moshe, the bracha Moshe gives to Am Yisrael. We see in Sefer Parshat Dvarim that Hashem should bless you and multiply you, as much as 1,000 times. The lo yam eat misparchem, so B'nai Yisrael should always be growing and not shrinking. Ashkalim, and by the way, when you come to Moshe, you're not going to come empty-handed. You're going to bring a half shekel. He's going to put the shekel. Oh, you're from Trevor Reuben? And each bucket would get filled. Ashkalim, and the money that they're giving is going to be tzedakah, kofer al nafshotechem. So we see clearly that there were two different opinions. There was one count, there were two counts. Who's counted in the count, who's not counted in the count. But again, as Rashi gives his interpretation of the fiscal year, a lot of the Parshanim have a lot of problem with that, as we see, because of the fact that we know in general that we count people by their birthday in terms of determining their age for many things, for most things in halacha, and it would seem very strange that we would be counting them. But the answer is seemingly much simpler, that in one count Levi is included, the other is not. By the way, according to those, there were two counts, and Ramban goes into this a little bit more. It appears that the first count was primarily given through the shkalim, but it was everybody threw their shkalim into one bucket. There was no need to separate tribes and families and whatever, and they did not count the shekels. The shekels were not counted to find how many people there were. They were weighed, and everybody had to give. That's why you had to give this uniform amount. You couldn't give if it was just counting the coins. Could say, okay, yeah, everybody has to give one coin. They can give a dime, or they can give a quarter, they can give a dollar piece, or they can give a $10 piece. They have to give one coin. But that's not how they did it. Went by weight. So everybody had to give a uniform weight. Because if not, if I get 10 shekels, and I weigh, I knew it was 100 shekels by weight, not by counting 100 shekels. That was how it was done. The second one, it appears that everybody, again, appeared before Moshe, and there's one opinion that says they also gave the shekel, but another opinion, which is not the Ramban, says that when they appeared before Moshe, they were counted by heads, and because it was Moshe counting them on Hashem's direct command, it did not have to be through a half shekel. And then there's a whole discussion on the Parshanim, which I can't get into because obviously my time is up, about whether in general, when you count people, you can only count them indirectly, or you can count people directly. That's a whole different machloket, and it bears on a whole different story about David HaMelech and when he counted Am Yisrael and what happened and why there was a plague. All sorts of wonderful things that we could keep going, but our time is up. But again, I think the key lesson here is that, go back to the beginning, it says Su'u et Rosh. It says lift up the head. By going and appearing before Moshe, Moshe gives you a good feeling. You know you're a somebody because, hey, I got counted. He asked me who my father was, my grandfather was, all the way up to your shaven head. And so by doing that, Moshe is making everybody feel that they are important as an individual, not just as a bunch of the herd, as one of the herd. And that, I think, is the key difference between counting things and just assigning them numbers versus counting things and assigning them a name and an individuality. And we have to realize that whenever we are in a group setting and we're looking at a large population, we have to remember that every single one is unique and individual, has their own skills and talents and value and things we can learn from them. And when we do that, then we have fulfilled this concept of Su'u et Rosh, of making everybody stand out and stand up and be counted, not just as a number. I hope and pray that we will soon be able to count all of our people, our chayalim coming home safely, and all of the hostages coming home safely. And may everybody have a Chag Sameach. There will not be a shiur next week because Chag doesn't end until probably around 8:30 or so. But Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Have a good Chag, Shabbat Shalom first.